is the idea of yoga developed. The idea of learning how to not be attached. And learning how to do this in your dreams, learning how to do this. And in Tibet, a very interesting notion developed that the human being was made up of three bodies: a physical body, an emotional body, and a mental spiritual body. And these three bodies involve the bodies of other beings, lesser beings, lesser consciousness beings. And the notion in Tibet became of training these three bodies, of training the physical, training the mental, training the emotional, the mental, spiritual. And so this essentially is in Tibet there became many sects of Buddhism. And in particular, the one that I've been attracted to is little known in the United States. It's called the Dzogchen. The Dzogchen, instead of considering the Buddha as a great being that you learn from, the Dzogchen, the basic notion was you became a Buddha. And that's a little bit different than just hearing about something. It's for something that, for example, is lacking in Christianity. Among Christians, the values are important, but you don't become the Christ. You don't become equivalent to the Christ. In Buddhism, in particular in the Dzogchen, you did aim to become the Buddha. And the notion was simply that if you separated the three bodies and you trained and you purified each body separately, and then you recombined them, that you would evolve. And basically that notion of separation, purification, and putting it back together is basically the principle of alchemy. It's a method that the alchemists developed in their work. Separation, purification, coagulation. The question for myself has become, how did the Buddha become the Buddha? What made him stand out and develop these ideas? And in the ancient traditions, there's a notion of reincarnation, and that's very prominent in Buddhism. The Buddha was not the only Buddha, and there were Buddhas before him. From which he inherited their components. And so in that sense, the notion of past lives is not only looking back and seeing what the threads are that make you who you are, but it's looking forward. It's a notion of training the mental, physical, emotional body and projecting it into the future. And the notion comes up then of conscious reincarnation. So you had the Hinayana Buddhism, the small work, as it's called by the Mahayana people, who call themselves the great work. And then you have the Tibetan yoga and Indian yogas to become the Buddha, to clarify the three bodies. And then you finally have, and in Tibet, by the way, which I admire greatly, the culture, I also don't like a lot about the culture. There's a division between the monks and the populace. Then when it comes down to it, the monks are the superior group. And the population generally is more inferior. And then you have groups like the Dzogchen, which speak about being the Buddha. And that's a very interesting notion, because in all the classes on Buddhism that I've been at, I've never heard anybody speak about that, about becoming the Buddha. And that's what I think that everybody who studies Buddhism should try to do. They should become, in their own life, a person who is not attached and is open-minded and is compassionate and is happy, doesn't suffer by virtue of the attachments. I've become interested in alchemy because I consider it to be an outgrowth of Buddhism. That alchemy speaks about how a human being can perfect themselves and how to use the energies in the physical universe to bolster your own energies. The Indian tradition, the whole yogic tradition, is based on the notion of prana. That there's some magical component in the air that gives life, that makes this planet unique. And in my own work, I've come up with the notion that this prana, this energy, which makes us human and makes us capable of evolving into even greater humans, that this is fundamentally the radioactivity that's in the air around us. This invisible air is full of basic energy. That's the energy of matter that's based on this whole motion of the atom and the molecule that we know about through modern science. This is prana. This is radioactivity. So my work as an alchemist has been to say that we die because of a lack of radioactivity, because this radioactivity isn't sustained in the body sufficiently. So my work has been, and And the work of alchemy traditionally has been, the great work has been to make the philosopher's stone a physical substance that if you ingest it, if you use it as a medicine, it in effect makes you immortal, or makes you, at any rate, very long-lived. And to my mind, the yogic work that comes out of all of this is to learn how to reincarnate. And these are the techniques that I've been working on. This is a very frail body. At the turn of the 19th century, the average age was around 40, 41, something in there. And we've come a long way to where the average age is now in the 70s. And where a person like myself, who's 87, is really pushing it. I believe that fundamentally this aging process takes place because the body doesn't hold the prana. The body does not hold the radioactivity. And where do I want to go with that?
It's working for you if you can be up all night till 5 a.m. doing your other work, and then still come down, have energy come down here and share all this with us.
And after you fell in a ditch,
The week before.
You fell in a ditch?
a deep
What?
ditch,
But
You fell in a ditch?
a big,
A week ago.
Oh.
Yeah, I really got banged up. I have a big scar here. And,
Well, now I was ready to say, well, you should see the ditch.
and now back to
the ditch was full of small twigs. It's a miracle I didn't poke my eye out,
Wow.
because I went face down,
Oh,
and I had bruises all over my face.
you're so lucky.
not your face. Not that
we're lucky
pretty
to have you
face.
here today,
Yeah.
talking about Buddha.
Happy. Happy
So
to have
anyway,
you.
this is my work as an alchemist has been to actually take in the energy of Earth and to keep that energy is something called, in science, called the Schumann frequency. Something, point something vibrations per minute, per second, excuse me. And the work of becoming immortal, I believe, or living a long time and being able to consciously reincarnate. That's another area that I think metaphysically we have to be concerned with. And that's a subject that I don't know if anybody is teaching it. Who's teaching, I believe it involves having a certain relationship to the Schumann resonance. And what I've been doing is for a long time I was treating apples. And specifically in the apple, there's a little organ called the mitochondria. And the mitochondria provides the energy for every cell. And I've been concerned with putting energy into the mitochondria. I was doing it with the apple and then eating the apples with these improved mitochondria. Now what I'm simply doing is I'm simply breathing this radiation. I have a jug of it. This radiation, this basic pranic energy, gets very diffused. It operates differently, it acts differently, it is different at different geographic positions on the earth. And so I have a jug of radioactive rocks, and I've been breathing it a couple of times a day, taking 5 deep breaths. Because all the yogic work, if you notice, has to do with breathing. Mental physics is based on the whole notion of a series of breathing practices. Breathing along with meditation, along with certain thoughts, to channel the energy as best you can. So I think it's very important, if my work has succeeded in isolating the actual nature of prana.
Quick question. Did you just get burnt out on apples?
It was very clumsy. I would take the apples and put them in there for a week, along with the radioactive rocks, theoretically building up the mitochondria of the apples, and then eating those mitochondria. And I just decided it was just simpler and perhaps more direct to just breathe.
Cut out the middle fruit man.
Huh?
Cut out the middle man. Cut out the middle fruit.
Well, digestion being a slower process than breathing, I would see the sense in that. With breathing, the lungs are more rapidly can more rapidly receive energy than the gut necessarily.
Well, I think it's interesting that the whole yogic notion is based on the idea of prana and the substance, this mysterious substance in the air. And it just seems logical that this is the radioactivity that's in the air. That's been the conclusion of my 30-some years working as an alchemist. And that the Philosopher's Stone was basically a means of concentrating this energy so that you could take it inside of you.
So what's the difference between the prana in the air and the prana in the radioactive rocks?
The radioactive energy in the air varies according to geography. For example, it's probably very high in Japan, where you have a longer lifespan, where people on the average live longer than anywhere else.
Interesting you chose that as an example after
Fukushima.
Fukushima.
So we breathe, we taking this energy in all the time. I believe we're not getting enough. But on the other hand, this energy is very powerful. Radioactivity has a very bad name now because of the atom bomb, because it's known that radioactivity kills. But we live, this air is full of radioactivity of a certain level. And that's what I'm attempting to duplicate with my jug of radioactive earth. Now, reincarnation I think that that's an attribute that people have to develop. That if possible, you live as long as you can. There's kind of an inner desire to do that. But if there is an end to this physical body, And this physical body can no longer house the subtle emotional and mental, spiritual bodies. Then we have to be able to consciously transfer. Now, the evidence in reincarnation is they've gone around, particularly Professor Stevenson has gone around and done tens of thousands of studies, of interviews with people who have some memory of past lives. And some people do. And that, it seems to me, is one of the abilities that the yogi has to develop. That anybody who's interested in personal development has to develop this ability to reincarnate. And that has to be based on the idea of what do you fill your subtle bodies with. You simply fill it with ideas about the world, and people can be very wise, but without a knowledge of reincarnation and a sense of that, and a sense of the importance of that, I don't think you get very far. The Tibetans, by the way, don't believe that everybody reincarnates. They believe, and the Tibetans are a society, a very advanced society that's based on the notion of reincarnation. The monks are trained to be tulkus, Tulku, and that's a special kind of spiritual knowledge, the ability to reincarnate.
Would you say something that comes to my mind with the idea of reincarnating in accordance with the will?
What?
Reincarnating in accordance with the will would necessarily involve a knowledge of magnetism, or some understanding of magnetic dynamics.
It's similar to magnetism, this electrical energy that's around us. But I think that simply holding on to the concept of keeping the components of your mental, emotional, spiritual bodies together, simply that concept leads you into, with the thought influences the matter in a certain way.
Where particles behave differently when they're watched, and we know that they behave
And-
otherwise when we're not observing it.
And also, I'm taking a whiff of this very concentrated radioactivity. It's a very simple process. I've got a 2-gallon jug. The bottom of it has rocks, the mineral pitchblende, which is the basic mineral of uranium. And this, I bought a Geiger counter so I can check the nature of this energy. And I'm very careful. If I carry these rocks in my pocket, I would kill myself. Purely and simply, if I would keep these rocks underneath my pillow, I think that would be damaging. It's very uncertain how much I need of it. But
You are the guinea
I'm
pig.
still working on it.
You're the guinea pig.
And I am trying to communicate it to people. By the way, 29 Palms is full of radioactivity.
Huh.
Specifically in 29 Palms, there are a number of mines there. And the miners took up rocks that they believed had precious metals in them and discovered they didn't. These pitchblende rocks look like silver, look like the mineral silver. So the miners would bring this stuff up to the surface and then discover it wasn't valuable commercially and just throw it around the mine entrance. So the mine entrances in 29 Palms are full of an abnormal radioactivity.
Any records kept on how long those miners lived?
No, and it's a very interesting question.
Another question, because you've touched on, you know, the radioactivity in the atmosphere. We age and die because we have a lack of it. So you're doing a practice to receive more of it. Another thing that occurs to me is our body's ability to absorb it well and to store it well. And perhaps this is somewhere that we are in our evolution where, because DNA is always upgrading, perhaps our ability to retain what we do take in is also an important piece.
There's a lot of very open questions here. And I've been very much interested in the legend of alchemy, of individuals who succeeded living for several thousand years. But I'm not sure. I'm absolutely not sure. So I read this is a wonderful little book about Buddhism called What Would Buddha Do?
Hold on, who's it?
And it
Who's it by?
has sections like, what would the Buddha do if somebody hates him? What would the Buddha do when a friend lets him down? What would a Buddha do when he gets sick? What would a Buddha do about dieting? What would a Buddha do about lying? What would a Buddha do when facing a crisis? What would a Buddha do when feeling frustrated? What would Buddha do about road rage? It goes on and on and on like this. And basically that's the way that people study Buddhism. What I'm urging now, into this little group of initiates here, is that we begin to consider, how did the Buddha learn what he did? How did he reincarnate and develop the wisdom and hold on to the wisdom from past lives? The Tibetans have a term for that wisdom, a word. And words are important because they indicate where we should be looking. The Tibetan word for this accumulated knowledge of the generations is Rigpa, R-I-G-P-A in Tibetan. And this is the objective of the Tibetan work, to build up Rigpa wisdom inside of you, so that you look at every problem with the calmness of a Buddha, with the detachment of a Buddha, with the knowledge that accrues from a number of generations. We obviously think that a 10-year-old child doesn't have the maturity of a 50-year-old man or a 50-year-old woman. And the notion of living a life so you accumulate wisdom, and a specific kind of wisdom about how to reincarnate, for example, about when you work in a chemistry lab and you're dealing with elements and combining elements, we've learned that the elements combine in special proportions. We've learned this is based on the atomic structure. Well, intuitively, you begin to develop this knowledge about your emotional and your mental spiritual bodies. And you learn how to hold them together. And you value that particular kind of wisdom. We know that they selected Dalai Lama on the basis of past lives. That they looked for monks who, as children, have certain memories and lose those memories. But children do hold on and can be identified by that. So by thinking about reincarnation, by thinking about these subtle bodies and how to hold them together, I think you begin to make progress toward actually doing this and toward actually reincarnating. I think we note people who live very vigorous lives, who live lives of meaning and purpose, who take on problems and seek to solve problems. We value that. The next step is to value that enough to hold it together so that we overcome the limitation of dying. And that's what essentially alchemy is all about. It's about making medicines, and I believe about specifically making radioactive medicines. So anyway, I've spoken for about 45 minutes.
I have a question or a statement. Well, the pitch blend.
What?
The pitch blend is uranium.
Uranium ore.
It's uranium ore, so they didn't develop that mine, for example, in 29 Palms because it's a different kind of grade of uranium. It's not the valuable uranium that they make weapons from, I guess.
Not quite here.
The uranium pitch blend,
Yeah.
or it's the uranium ore, it's not what they make the weapons with. It's a different grade of uranium. That's why they didn't develop that mine in 29 Palms, for example.
Right, but what it takes is tons of ore to make a gram of radium. It takes enormous amounts.
Radium's used for,
It's one of the radioactive metals.
what do they use radium for?
They use radium to kill certain cells, to do certain kinds of
Or
surgery.
they use it for chemotherapy maybe and that kind of thing?
Right.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Or
Right.
maybe for energy in some cases.
I mean, the watches that we have that glow in the dark are radioactive.
Possible.
That's what gives the light.
Well, the computer screens too.
Huh?
The computer screens too.
Right.
Okay, interesting. That's, addendum, or rather, yeah, I would like to, I guess you have, there's a tie-in between the uranium and the Buddha, awakened mind somewhere, that you're expounding on, but.
I'm saying that the Buddha could stay alive for a longer period if he had control of this energy.
Okay, well
And
then,
so, and that the whole notion of reincarnation is tied up with the fact that the subtle bodies can hold together through many lifetimes.
so, then what I wanted to also address is my feeling, my contention, point of contention with what you said about the Dzogchen tradition, and they're the only ones that say to be become the Buddha.
No, they have it in a very pronounced way.
Okay.
But the Christian
One has
tends
different
to-
views with Christ.
to live according to a certain kind of life. I mean, that's a function of religion. That's what religion has done. It's held society together despite the fact that men are very aggressive, humans are very aggressive, and are necessarily so in certain circumstances.
Right, okay. But getting back to the point I want to make is that I'm just, whatever you said, this is what I have a contention with, what you said, when you alluded to what I'm trying to address, and that is that other schools of Tibetan Buddhism are saying become the Buddha, more or less, for at least two examples. When we say, for example, we do the practice of Pema who's called the second Buddha. So if you attain the state of Pema, then you are becoming essentially a Buddha. And we do that in the pujas, in the mind training, right? In the mind training, we supplicate the Guru, the Buddha, to so that we merge, so that the Buddha's body, speech, and mind merges with our body, speech, and mind. The three doors become one. So, in that sense, that is becoming a Buddha, number one. Secondly, when we do the practice, say, of Amitabha, Buddha of the Western Paradise, we supplicate and visualize our being born in that Buddha paradise on a lotus, and we are essentially visualizing ourselves being born as Buddhas in that paradise realm of the Western Buddha, Amitabha.
Right.
That's universal.
But those
amongst the Tibetan
notions,
practices.
those notions don't sufficiently define prana so that you can get more of it and use it properly.
Maybe you can
And
use
the word
prana
prana
to
itself,
awaken your rainbow body.
I mean, we all are breathing, importance, and we know the importance of breath and so forth. But it's science to be able to determine what is it in the air that's good and what's bad. There's certain air that's not good for you. And I think my identification of radioactivity as prana, if it's correct, is an enormous leap. It's something that you can go into the Bodhi tree or any metaphysical bookstore and you will not see that thought there in any of those books, that radioactivity is prana, and vice versa. In other words, all of you have learned the importance of yogic breathing, and all of us do it as human beings. But now, from this moment on, you're going to be thinking more consciously about it. And if mind does influence matter, which I believe it does, and I believe that that's what
You know, spoon,
belief,
you mean the spoon bending?
huh?
Spoon bending, but Uriel, what's his name?
It's true
There's no spoon.
For one example.
that you can't bend the spoon unless you actually, I mean, I've done
No
it.
spoon.
I've actually sat there, and when you have a large group of people,
Uri Geller, that's his name.
yeah, I was with Yuri, and that doubt that you can do that is overcome because you see somebody doing it. So the same way, that's what I think the initial idea of why it's important that you relate radioactivity to prana. That's a new thought, and it may help you live longer. It may help you breathe more consciously. It may help you breathe a more appropriate air. That's the essence of, in a couple of words, what it is I've been trying to say all night.
Cool.
Well,
Well, where's that pitch blende come from? Like, where was it mined? The stuff you have.
That what?
I was just curious where the pitch blende came from that you have. Where was it mined? Just curious.
I actually bought it from a mineral shop.
Oh, okay.
It's
I
called
actually-
29 Palms Mining District. It's like southeast of 29 Palms.
Southeast of 29
It's on
Palms.
the farthest eastern edge of Joshua Tree National Park. It's actually where these three canyons come together, and there's about 28 different gold mines.
I meant to bring the jug actually, but I didn't, just forgot. But there's this 2-gallon container, and it has a layer of rocks at the bottom. They're very ordinary looking rocks. And they're giving off energy, and they'll give off energy for thousands of years.
Now saying that there's like 28 mines
Right there.
on the
That's-
southeast
that's-
side, is it southeast end of the Joshua Tree National Park? Or
It's
what
called
is
the 29 Palms Mining District.
Oh, it's right on the southeast side of 29 Palms.
Yeah, it's a big
But
region.
is it in or outside of the park?
It's on the east of Joshua Tree National.
On the eastern edge of Joshua Tree National Park.
Yeah, like southeast of the town of 29 Palms.
Yeah.
But just past the eastern edge of the park is, that's why it's there, it's the 29.
Well, I mean,
Palms
the
Mining
eastern edge of the park is all the way around.
Yeah, just
Way
Google
far.
it and put in 29 Palms Mining District and you'll see maps, so.
So we need to invest in these mines and we'll make billions of
Not
dollars.
only that, but I think your meditations are important in this respect. That you should meditate on the idea of reincarnation. And there's very little information about that particular meditation.
Isn't it true that certain types of Buddhists, I think it's the type that you mentioned, one of the things they train to do is to enter depth with a certain type of thought, like a pure thought, towards crossing the void to the other side, the other shore. So, but I know that Tibetan Book of the Dead was used by Timothy Leary the psychedelic experiences for that very purpose. But that's what the Tibetan Book of the Dead supposedly maps out with, there being 46 days.
49.
49.
And I was just thinking about it right before you said it, too.
Bardo,
The
So-
Tibetan Book of the Dead is the manual
Yeah,
that the Tibetans have.
It's a training manual.
Yeah, but it became popular in the 60s because they took that idea of crossing the void through death and used it as a metaphor for the psychedelic experience. So people would focus on, instead of just the fact of focusing on something that they couldn't control that was happening to them, but to control their thought to make
Well,
it mutative. So
Which really became popular in the West, but other cultures have been doing similar practices, sort of trial runs for death, initiation for different things for
The essential
thousands
Tibetan
of
practice
people.
is called POA. It's transliterated as PHOWA. And that's a specific practice of consciously transferring consciousness. And that's a meditation that I'm developing. And I think it's important to have that kind of meditation, not just meditate on being a calm, peaceful person, but to meditate consciously on transferring your essence. So that's, I think, an important point that isn't normally spoken about in metaphysical circles. To consciously reincarnate. And I've come up with a very important little book somewhere. Here it is. This is one of the best books I've seen on reincarnation. It's a guy named Brennan, and I'm going to be writing him. I'm going to try to find him. Because
Well, you might get an idea if whether or not he's alive by his.
what?
When was that published? I'm just curious.
Published in 1981.
Oh, kind of recent. Kind of 30.
If I could interject something on the,
it's cool.
so the contention, I think both sides are right, and I think what we're kind of touching on is esoteric teaching and exoteric teaching, whereas there are certainly esoteric, mystical Christians who understand the Christ as a formula, not a personality. They are actively engaged in becoming Christ.
You were talking about the soul.
And Buddha, Buddhists have their own exoteric teaching and their esoteric teaching, and it kind of, it's like that everywhere you go, really. There's sort of the outer order and the inner order. And a lot of people start off with emulation on the outer order. They're okay, that one has something I want, so I emulate it. And then after a while, a lot of people in the population maybe stay at that level, and then others will eventually start to enter the inner order, the esoteric teaching, when they realize that this is all a story about them. It's personal. Then they start to assume, what it is for them to become a Buddha. And what kind of responsibilities come with that, and what sort of, and it's sort of like looking in a mirror, and then one day the mirror is gone, and you still see the reflection in yourself. It's kind of the way I look at it. But in whatever people practice, I see exoteric practitioners and
The key word is radioactivity, which is a word that is a horrible word to people. negative word.
Solar energy
And
might
yet,
sweeten it a little
The
bit.
reality is that this room is full of radioactivity. That's the reality. This invisible air that we're breathing into our body is noted by its radioactivity. Its radioactivity can be measured with a meter. And this is the unique thing about what I've been talking about.
Well, to make it palatable, perhaps it's more palatable to people to think of solar energy because that's the same thing we're talking
The
about.
same thing.
In this neck of the universe, our sun is basically the generator of all of our local radioactivity.
But look at the importance of prana in metaphysical books. The whole basis of all of metaphysics. And what I'm doing is defining it in a way that we can package it. In other words, that we can package prana. And too much prana is no good. Too much life force is no good.
The medicinal dose that we were talking about last time.
Do you think it will sell better than the banana peel hoax of 67?
Because that stuff tasted awful. I don't know. Bananas are all right.
Yeah, I became the center of that.
I bet.
Well,
I see it in the free press all the time, because you were
yeah.
selling ads to all these banana peel powder vendors.
I bet you were talking about smoking them to get high.
That's what we're talking about.
Okay.
And he had one free press that, I don't know if it was a Paul Krasner type hoax article, but it said that the Supreme Court was weighing whether or not to make bananas illegal.
Yeah.
That was a hoax.
Right.
Hoaxes are important.
Yeah. Funny stuff. Good stuff. Well, is that a wrap?
That's
For
a
that?
wrap.
Beautiful. Thank you. Let me lead everyone in sharing the merit that we've generated here in this dharmic gathering tonight. Okay. So sharing the merit, I'll do in English first. By this merit may we become enlightened. Having become enlightened, may we defeat all evils of the mind. Across the endless storm of birth, old age, illness, and death, or transition, may we help all beings cross the ocean of the suffering of the worlds. And in Tibetan, Sanjay Chuda Homso Chi Jognala Tongchu Bardi Dani Trabsoji Dagi Jinsoji Beso Namji Rula Pinchir Sonji Drubarshu. In English again. By this merit, may we become enlightened. Having become enlightened, may we defeat all evils of the mind. Across the endless storm of birth, illness, old age, and death or transition, may we help all beings cross the ocean of the suffering of the worlds. Sarva Mangalam, Tashi prayer. May the day be well, and the night be well, and the midday hours bring happiness too. May both the day and the night always be well. By the blessings of the triple gem, may all be auspicious. Aho. Aho. How wonderful. Thank you. Good talk.
Thank you for doing that.
Next
Nell, I hope to see
Wednesday.
you again.
I hope to see you again too.
You're a very attractive woman.
Thank you.
Next Wednesday we'll do the Bhima Puja here in this physical space.
Okay. Do you want to?
I
I
hope you
can
have a
swing
job
by and
box.
grab you if you want to come here.
Ah!
What's that?
I can swing by and grab and pick you up.
Now wants you to, if you come a week from now, she wants to either bring your bottle of rocks. Remember the uranium. She wants a hit. Or five deep breaths at least.
Yeah, I'll give you $2 for that.
Ah!
Well, fruits eat medicinal dose.
No, that,
It will kill you.
a little bit off the topic of Buddhism, but the integratron built by George Van Tassel, had the idea of recharging the human cell
I still
to
like
extend human life by close to 20 years. And that's why it was built on a vortex to build up static charge. And then people would pass through like a beam of energy that had been focused in the dome.
I've been
And then
wanting to
that
check
would
that place out.
recharge the actual nucleus of the cell, because each cell actually loses power over the course of human life. So
Sort of to give the
but I know that a lot of
electrolytes a push.
doctors, like when it comes to studying aging, the only thing that we can really study are the effects of aging. And there's been a lot of research on what are called telomeres, which are small pieces of genetic material. And what happens is that over the age of the body, they lose energy like points on a battery and start to shrivel. And when they shrivel, that is one of the primary things that they think actually causes the body to age.
I was going to be a geneticist.
So, you
That's
know,
what I'm
from
trained
the
for.
engineer in me wants to say that if you were trying to recharge something on a cellular level, that maybe some type of nanobot could actually recharge the individual cell on a very small level. And you know, now they're dealing with, where you can be injected with a type of technology that can repair the body. And they're very tiny, and it's a very progressive field. But it just seems to me that, beyond any other outside and metaphysical way, there might even be approaching some kind of direct physical way to do that in the future.
Sounds like the physical is merging with the metaphysical.
Yeah, it's kind of,
Well, I think programming has something to do with it too. That they've done some studies that show that the DNA really has some parts of code that seem to be the point at which the software tells the hardware to start turning off and shutting down. So they've thought about
and you know what, I've always
rewriting that software.
I've always had the theory that you
Yeah.
get old, partly, because there may be effects on the body, but like, in my opinion, I think you get old because the world tells you you're old.
But you're resilient
And you are,
too.
the world being a chronological entity on a linear time scale tells you that you come into the world at one time
Like this is supposed to happen.
at
Yeah.
another. And then all in with that is what you're
Yeah.
supposed to do at certain points of that journey.
Self-fulfilling prophecy kind of. Yeah,
So,
I think that.
because I get that attitude a lot from people who are older, where they, when people say, it's like a catchphrase when people say, "I'm too old for this." And what you do is you convince yourself that you're no longer vital to
Which is
this.
what they say affects the subconscious.
Yeah, exactly. It's the
Well,
So do you want to go to the next talk?
And that's programming, and that's
Sure.
programming.
Right.
That's right.
And I'll have an injection so we can live to 200.
You're not going to get rid of me that easy. Here for 200.
Well, I was just watching the TED Talk, and Nicholas Negroponte, who's a kind of a futurist who makes a lot of predictions.
But nobody talks about radioactivity in the way that I spoke about it tonight.
I think I made
That's
a
true.
And that is
You do now?
I need
a
a
real
mess.
measurable energy.
Oh, you made a mess. You should have did.
And
Ah.
is it the foundation of all matter? And the problem is, why is there life on this planet and not life everywhere? And this is connected with, in my mind, the answer is so obvious. But this is certainly a big factor to look at.
Yeah, it's definitely thought-provoking.
But if you talk about radioactivity, it's considered a negative.
In a historical context.
Huh?
In a historical context, because mainly when we talk about radioactivity, we talk about the engineering of technology to develop radioactivity and what its uses were.
Of course, you have radio and television and the telephone and all our communication systems that built on this. But biologically, we consider radioactivity to be a danger.
Have you ever heard of a concept that certain European mystics believe in? It comes from a science fiction book that was written in the 19th century. It's a concept. It's called Vril.
Oh, what?
Vril?
Vril.
Vril?
Oh, Vril.
Yeah.
VRIL.
And that's said to be this type of energy that comes from nature, and that if it can be found and harnessed, that not only will it turn you into a super being, but it will allow you to control everybody else who does not control the Vril. And that was a big movement in World War II, in the 30s, of people trying to develop the capacity to do that. So, it's just something I've done some research on recently, just because I'm kind of a history buff.
You're a bright lady.
Thank you.
The Vril Society.
Oh, totally. That's one of my past lives. I think.
Balls rolling.
But there was said to be all these women that they grew their hair long in the back because they thought that was an antenna.
Receptors.
Yeah, but
Must have thrown them away.
that's how the Nazis escaped from UFOs
They
technology.
must have thrown them away.
I have these up on my refrigerator.
Oh, cool.
Nice. Were we on Candid Camera?
Are we?
Sonny, did you?
Oh, yeah,
Really
I may
are
not
Is
have,
that thing running?
I may or may not have videotaped this, I don't know.
It's going.
Is that thing?
Yeah, it was going.
All your thoughts have come up to
Thank you. It's September 16th, 2015, and a year ago, or was it 2 years ago, we went to Santa Ana, and Art Kunkin asked the same question, how much does this little video camera cost? And I said, $40 at Rite Aid, Art.
That's a camera, isn't it?
It's a camera and